A clear, bell-like voice suddenly echoed from the smallest spatial realm, and what unfolded next caused everyone's pupils to constrict. Ripples began to emerge in the void above the spatial realm, forming a passageway. From it stepped a figure with a look of sheer astonishment. The aura emanating from the figure was merely at the heaven-merging stage, yet the individual could hardly believe they had so effortlessly exited a spatial domain created by a heavenly supreme. No. Impossible. What just happened? Unbelievable. They actually came out. Did the Guardian Realm Lord cut corners earlier? The appearance of the heaven-merging stage cultivator left all the Alliance leaders in disbelief. In contrast, Yuan Cheng remained calm, as though everything was within his expectations. However, what would follow would leave the Alliance leaders even more astounded. Since you've made it out of the first spatial realm, proceed to the second, Yuan Cheng instructed the heaven-merging stage cultivator, who, though still in shock, swiftly moved toward the second spatial realm, this one hundreds of miles wide. Buzz. A dozen breaths later, ripples again emerged over the smallest spatial realm. Another figure stepped out, this time exuding the aura of the Divine Soul stage, their expression equally filled with disbelief. Don't stop. Head to the second realm, Yuan Cheng directed. Buzz. Minutes later, yet another figure emerged from the first spatial realm, radiating the aura of the Spirit Wheel stage. A few moments after that, even the weakest individual at the Spirit Movement stage managed to walk out. The sight of someone who had just entered the Spirit Movement stage, barely starting on their cultivation path, exiting a domain created by a heavenly supreme, was earth-shattering. If word of this reached the Great Thousand Worlds, the impact would be unprecedented. With Wei Tiandi's assistance, the Spirit Movement and Spirit Wheel cultivators entered the second spatial realm. Meanwhile, as they entered, another spatial passage suddenly opened in the void, and out stepped the heaven-merging stage cultivator, returning from the second spatial realm. Without pause, they dove into the third spatial realm. A dozen breaths later, ripples emerged from the second spatial realm, and the Divine Soul stage cultivator exited, quickly advancing to the third realm. Half an hour passed before the Spirit Wheel stage cultivator left the second realm and entered the third. At the same time, the heaven-merging stage cultivator emerged from the third spatial realm and entered the fourth. An hour later, the Divine Soul stage cultivator exited the third realm and entered the fourth. 2 hours after that, the fourth spatial realm rippled once more as the heaven-merging stage cultivator, now somewhat weakened, finally emerged. Shock exploded in the hearts of the Alliance leaders like a tidal wave. 1 million supreme spiritual liquid. I'll take it, Yuan Cheng said with a smile, addressing Wei Tiandi. How is this possible? Wei Tiandi muttered, still unable to believe what he was seeing. Reluctantly, he retrieved a spirit-gathering bowl containing the agreed-upon million supreme spiritual liquid and flicked it toward Yuan Cheng. At this moment, all eyes were fixed on the spatial realms. The strongest, the heaven-merging stage cultivator, had cleared all 4 realms. What would become of the remaining 3? Anticipation ran high. Time passed, 2 hours, 3 hours, until 10 full hours had elapsed, and no further movement emerged from the spatial realms. The Spirit Movement stage cultivator had exited the first realm but was trapped in the second. The Spirit Wheel stage cultivator had passed through the first and second realms but was stuck in the third. The Divine Soul stage cultivator had cleared the first 3 realms but could not escape the fourth. Only the heaven-merging stage cultivator had cleared all 4. Wei Tiandi, open the passageways. They won't make it out, Yuan Cheng finally said, addressing an increasingly impatient Wei Tiandi. Damn it. If you don't explain everything here and now, I'll settle this with you in front of the Great Thousand Alliance Master. Wei Tiandi roared in fury. Instead of opening the passageways, he destroyed the realms with a wave of his sleeve. Yet, the 3 trapped within were perfectly protected and unharmed. It seems, Yuan Cheng, that you know far more secrets than we do, the Undying Lord remarked. It seems I was truly wrong. Such an obvious pattern, and yet I never noticed it, Yu Xiaojiang remarked, somewhat disappointed. He had initially believed that the critical threshold of a dimensional world shackles was related to the energy within it. But now, through Yuan Cheng's experiment, he had uncovered part of the truth. Oh, Master Yu Xiaojiang appears to have deduced something. Why not share it with us? Yuan Cheng asked with a smile as he looked at Yu Xiaojiang. No, my explanation is bound to be incomplete. It would be better if you provided the explanation, Yu Xiaojiang replied, shaking his head. Stop dithering and just tell us what happened earlier. How could a spirit movement stage cultivator break through the space I created? Wei Tiandi's tone grew increasingly agitated. After all, the scenes from earlier were simply too difficult for him to accept. For the upcoming explanation, I believe you will feel the same as Master Yu Xiaojiang. Wondering how you failed to notice such an easy-to-understand pattern all this time, Yuan Cheng began. The leaders of the various alliances fell silent. They had nothing to say and could only listen to Yuan Cheng's explanation. The level of a dimensional shackle is not, as Master Yu Xiaojiang previously suggested, determined by the amount of resources within the dimension. Instead, it is dictated by something that most people are entirely unaware of, Yuan Cheng stated. It's a matter of spatial size. The space created by cultivation and the spatial prisons imposed by powerful cultivators are entirely different. A spatial prison constructed by a heavenly supreme can easily trap an earth supreme. However, creating an independent dimensional world capable of restraining an earth supreme is an entirely different matter. From years of traveling through countless lower dimensions, we've observed that the critical threshold of lower dimensions corresponds to various cultivation stages. For example, the critical threshold of a lower-level dimension aligns with the heaven merging stage. For mid-level dimensions, it aligns with the heaven transformation stage. High-level dimensions match the heaven reaching stage, while super-level dimensions align with the supreme stage. Beyond that, the 10 super-level dimensions have critical thresholds equivalent to the Earth Supreme stage. Here, Master Yu Xiaojiang wasn't entirely wrong. Super-level dimensions indeed contain far more resources than high-level dimensions, which in turn surpass mid-level dimensions, and so on. However, an overlooked aspect is the relationship between spatial size and these thresholds. Lower-level dimensions span tens of thousands of miles, mid-level dimensions span hundreds of thousands of miles, high-level dimensions span millions of miles, super-level dimensions span several million miles, and the 10 super-level dimensions exceed tens of millions of miles. From this perspective, a conclusion can be drawn. The larger the spatial size, the higher the dimensional shackle's critical threshold. A heaven-merging stage cultivator breaks through the shackles of a world spanning tens of thousands of miles. A heaven transformation stage cultivator breaks through one spanning hundreds of thousands of miles, and so on. For an Earth Supreme, the critical threshold corresponds to a world spanning tens of millions of miles. The connection is clear. The larger the space, the higher the dimensional shackle's threshold. The Great Thousand Worlds far exceed any lower dimension because of their immense size. In contrast, the extraterritorial world matches the Great Thousand Worlds because of a similar spatial scale. That is why individuals from lower dimensions ascend to the Great Thousand Worlds, but never the reverse. If we were to merge all lower dimensions into one, it would create a world comparable to the Great Thousand Worlds. Such a world would have a critical threshold not of the Supreme or Earth Supreme stages, but something equivalent to the Great Thousand Worlds or the extraterritorial world. This stage, beyond the Heavenly Supreme, can be called the Lesser Dominator stage. Conversely, the smaller the space, the lower the critical threshold. For example, a heaven-merging stage cultivator can break the shackles of a space spanning tens of thousands of miles. In a space spanning just a few thousand miles, the threshold drops to the Divine Soul stage. In a space of a few hundred miles, the Spirit Wheel stage suffices. And in an even smaller space of a few dozen miles, even someone at the Spirit Movement stage could break through. The three individuals earlier were each trapped in spaces where the dimensional shackles matched their cultivation limits, preventing their breakthroughs. As Yuan Cheng finished his explanation, everyone present drew a sharp breath. At last, they understood why spaces created by heavenly supreme experts could be breached by cultivators of far lower stages. The revelation left them truly enlightened. Was Master Yu Xiaojiang correct in his speculation that the extraterritorial evil clan seeks to merge all lower dimensions into one as an experiment for their grander plan? I suspect their ambitions are far greater. As mentioned earlier, the larger a dimensional world, the higher its shackle's critical point. Simply merging all lower dimensions holds no meaning for those extraterritorial demon ancestors who have already reached the dimensional shackle's critical point of the extraterritorial world. This is because even after the fusion, the lower dimension world would only match the Great Thousand Worlds, or the extraterritorial world in terms of the shackle's critical point. What they seek is far greater power. From this premise, their goal is to use the fusion of the lower dimensions as a starting point, and then merge the three major worlds into one colossal world. The critical point of such a world would surpass the lesser dominator stage, reaching an even more advanced realm, the Great Dominator stage. The extraterritorial evil clan's assault on the lower dimensions and the Great Thousand Worlds serves two purposes. First, to merge these two worlds completely, and second, to reduce competitors. If my conjecture is correct, the so-called Great Dominator stage can only have one. When a powerhouse at the Great Dominator stage emerges, the previously unbreakable shackles of the three major worlds will truly be surpassed. As stated earlier, breaking the shackles means advancing from a small world to a larger world. Therefore, if a Great Dominator stage expert emerges from the extraterritorial evil clan, it is highly likely that a world even larger than the Great Thousand Worlds will appear. And the only ones able to reach that world would be the extraterritorial evil clan. Yuan Cheng's calm voice echoed through the venue, leaving everyone present utterly stunned. The ultimate goal of the extraterritorial evil clan was horrifying to this extent, and Yuan Cheng himself was even more terrifying, deducing the entire scheme of the clan with just two merged lower dimensions. A man like this being at the top of the extraterritorial evil clan's kill list was hardly surprising. That's why I said from the beginning, this is a choice between life and death for us. If we want to survive, now that we know the true purpose of the extraterritorial evil clan, we must send our top powerhouses from all alliances to the lower dimensions. Ideally, we should move the entire alliance there, Yuan Cheng said, pointing to the model of the three major worlds beneath him. The current distribution of the three major worlds can be referenced here. The extraterritorial evil clan has surrounded both the lower dimensions and the Great Thousand Worlds. Our alliance must station itself at the edges of the lower dimensions to intercept and eliminate every branch of the extraterritorial evil clan entering the lower dimensions. Do all 7 alliances need to migrate to the lower dimensions? The Sacred Alliance leader asked. I investigated thoroughly. The extraterritorial evil clan's invasion of the lower dimensions primarily involves 5 major directions. These 5 areas are where their branches are most active, Yuan Cheng explained. Therefore, at least 5 of the 7 alliances must relocate to the lower dimensions. However, we also know the extraterritorial evil clan's power is overwhelming. Even when combined, our 7 alliances have fewer than 40 heavenly supreme experts, while the clan, based on known information, has at least 100 heavenly emperors. If they mobilize their full force against the alliances stationed in the lower dimensions, I doubt the 7 alliances could withstand it. To preserve our strength, we must ensure at least half survives. Thus, only 3 or 4 alliances can be stationed in the lower dimensions. However, if only 4 alliances guard the lower dimensions, there will be a gap for the clan to exploit, rendering our efforts futile. Yuan Cheng's deductions plunged everyone into silence, the severity of the situation far exceeding their expectations. Moments ago, they had mocked Yuan Cheng's experiments, but now they realized the colossal conspiracy hidden behind them. A sense of powerlessness washed over everyone. No, we have 8 alliances, a sudden voice broke the silence, drawing everyone's gaze to its source, the leader of the Great Thousand Alliance. What? 8 alliances? Where did the 8th come from? The other alliance leaders were shocked by Nan Tianzi's words. About 2 years ago, the Great Thousand Alliance saved a young man named Lindong in a sea region. He hails from a super lower dimension. Back then, his strength was only at the 3rd grade supreme level, yet he defeated a 5th grade supreme in one move. In just 2 short years, his power has surged to mid-stage Earth Supreme. He has since established a faction called the Martial Realm, reportedly annexing over a dozen surrounding continents. His development is astonishingly rapid. My intuition tells me that within a century, the Martial Realm will become our 8th alliance. Nan Tianzi said. Currently, Lin Dong is merely an honorary elder of the Great Thousand Alliance. Oh? Such talent exists in the lower dimensions? 100 years is not a long time for us. We can afford to wait, said the Lord of the Western Heaven Palace. As his words faded, an aged voice emerged from behind him. Not only do we have the 8th Alliance, but we also have a 9th Alliance. Everyone turned their eyes to Shui Yuan's back. Shui Yuan also glanced behind him. The speaker was none other than Wu Wanlong, the great elder of the Western Heaven Palace, who had accompanied Shui Yuan. Elder Wu Wanlong, which alliance are you referring to as the 9th Alliance? Have you discovered someone with extraordinary talent, like Nan Tianzi? Shui Yuan asked, as the others focused on Wu Wanlong, waiting with anticipation. Does the Palace Lord recall the lower dimension shackles breaker, who arrived in the Western Heaven realm a year ago? Wu Wanlong inquired. There are too many shackles breakers arriving in the Western Heaven realm each year. I don't know which one you mean, Shui Yuan replied. The young man who petitioned the Western Heaven Palace to rescue his wife from the Divine Void Palace in the Central Heaven realm. You even sent me to follow his progress, Wu Wanlong continued. But before he could finish, Shui Yuan's astonished voice rang out. Xiao Yan. Shui Yuan finally remembered the black-robed youth who had once sought aid from the Western Heaven Palace. Emerging from an advanced dimension, this youth had climbed from the 6th Grade Supreme to the peak of 9th Grade Supreme within a year. Such talent was truly terrifying. Palace Lord, Xiao Yan has now advanced to the Earth Supreme stage, Wu Wanlong said. So soon? Shui Yuan exclaimed in shock. He had known Xiao Yan reached the peak of 9th Grade Supreme a year ago, but hadn't expected him to break through to the Earth Supreme stage so quickly. With such rapid progress, this youth might ascend to the Heavenly Supreme stage within decades. If he established a faction, it could grow significantly, potentially producing several Heavenly Supreme powerhouses within a century. Flame Emperor Xiao Yan, martial ancestor Lin Dong. These two rising stars became deeply etched in the hearts of all alliance leaders attending the meeting. In their despair, they glimpsed a spark of hope. The saying proved true. When the cart reaches the mountain, there will always be a way forward. Meanwhile, as the alliance leaders convened, far away in the southeastern part of the relic continent, on a fragmented landmass, an extraordinary scene unfolded. In the 8 Kings region, within a boundless mountain range, countless figures gathered, their gazes fixed on a sea of flames that stretched endlessly across the landscape. Amidst the fiery expanse, 2 figures stood in confrontation. One was an old man, his clothes tattered and his skin charred. Opposite him, a figure shrouded entirely in flames hovered thousands of feet away. Flame Emperor Xiao Yan. Xiao Yan's eyes were cold as he locked onto the old man. Then, under the old man's horrified gaze, Xiao Yan lunged forward, throwing a punch. Boom! The punch, imbued with terrifying power, shattered the very fabric of space. The fragments disintegrated before touching the ground, consumed by the overwhelming fire.